Today's story was written by Reddit user Teller of Tall Tales. The mouse-like journalist sat across from the scarred human. Audio recorder set on the table between them as she scratched an ear and went over her question sheets. The human across from her smoked a hand-rolled cigarette. A two-handed bastard sword leaned against the table edge beside him. Satisfied that she had her questions in order, the journalist politely cleared her throat before asking the first question on her list, gently tapping start on the audio recorder at the same time. So, Mr. Alexandros, rumour has it that you and your company fought in every major conflict since the Human Liberation War. Can you put those rumours to rest for me? The human slowly stubbed their cigarette out before setting the sheathed bastard sword on the table. Collecting his thoughts, the human slowly replied, "Alexandros is my sword's name. Please call me Drake. As for the rumours..." Drake laughed softly, almost feeling the mud of a trench floor beneath his boots as he remembered the best years of his life. "They're somewhat incorrect. I fought in almost every conflict in the past 60 or so years. Some lasted only a few days after I got there." The mercenary chuckled, lighting another cigarette. The journalist nodded before asking a question not on her list. "You're 75 years old, aren't you? That means you've been fighting wars since before you could legally pilot a hovercraft. What draws a man into that lifestyle so young?" The mercenary stared at the journalist, face impassive. Surprised by the question, Drake glanced at his cigarette, the smoke curling towards the ceiling, much like the smoke curled into the air that day. "Nobody's ever asked me that before, so I'll give you the truth about what draws a 15-year-old boy into fighting other men's wars." Drake took a long drag on his cigarette, staring off into the distance as he thought back 50 years. As most know, back then humanity was yet another slave race, pacified through violence and eugenics, but there were a certain subset that they kept around for blood sports, gladiator matches and the like. Drake leaned forward, staring down at the sword in its simple black scabbard, the memories as crisp as the day they were formed. Children, much like myself, were dragged off to fight against promising young Geknosian warriors. A rite of passage for the rich and privileged was to kill a human in one-on-one melee combat. Drake slowly drew the sword from its scabbard, inspecting the leaf-shaped blade's razor edge. If the human won, them and their village would be granted their freedom. If they lost, nothing changed. An impossible challenge, but what do you expect? Drake stood and pointed the sword outwards, in line with his arm. Well, it was supposed to be impossible. Garavan Vandal took a deep breath of the blood-soaked arena air. He held his flax in a loose grip at his side, the forward curving blade the only worthwhile invention he'd seen in human history. The human boy at the other end of the sandpit stared back, eyes hollow, resigned, hopeless, their leaf-bladed bastard sword held in a loose one-handed grip. Garavan grinned as he started to approach the young human, thinking about how sweet the sight of their decapitated head would look on his wall. As Garavan approached to within 10 paces, the human moved for the first time. Holding the sword with two hands at their waist, the wide tip of the sword was angled upwards to eye level. Garavan just laughed at the human's sloppy guard and suddenly defiant eyes. Lunging forward, Garavan threw a lateral cut, aimed to take the human's head off. To everyone's surprise, the human repositioned their sword at lightning speed, the phalanx blade skittering along the humans as Garavan overextended. The human rotated their wrists around each other, the fat-bellied tip of the human sword flying for Garavan's neck. The young Geknosian soldier bent awkwardly back as the tip of the human sword whistled in front of his face. Garavan stumbled back, regaining his balance as the human adjusted their grip, the sword hanging low and pointing behind them, poised for an upwards cut or to more easily deflect and riposte a downward blow. The worst part, according to Garavan. The human was smiling. Garavan felt his blood boil at the human's insolence. He tightened his grip, holding his sword diagonally across his chest as he drew the dagger provided him. He wasn't screwing around anymore, and neither was the human. Before Garavan could switch his dagger into a better fighting grip, the human lunged. Instead of the upward cut he was expecting, the human feinted and sidestepped Garavan's swing. Not unscathed though, the phalanx curved tip cut a line across one of the boy's forearms. The human retaliated, twisting with the momentum of the sidestep and letting go of the sword with one hand to widen his swing, scoring a cut across Garavan's cheek. The two swordsmen stared each other down after their last exchange, both breathing hard from adrenaline. Tauntingly, the human raised their sword with one hand just beneath the crossguard, the tip in line with the rest of their arm. Garavan saw red as the human smirked and twisted the sword so the edge was parallel to the ground. He wildly sprinted forward, swinging his flax with every ounce of strength he had as the human let the sword tip fall towards the ground so it pointed straight down, holding it slightly away from his body as he blocked and caught the edge of the flax against his bastard swords. Garavan stabbed his dagger towards the human's throat, feeling it bite into flesh. Garavan's elation wavered as he saw the human's hand, pierced through and through by the dagger, holding its point away from their throat. Garavan disengaged and leapt back, leaving his dagger embedded in the human's palm. In utter disbelief, he watched the human pull the dagger from their hand with their teeth, then in one smooth motion, dropped it from his mouth, pinched the dagger's tip with their pierced hand and flicked it at Garavan's face. In a split-second decision, Garavan lifted his flax and deflected the thrown dagger, a balloon of triumph filling his stomach, as he was about to finish this petulant human off. The balloon was popped by the fat-bellied tip of the human's leaf-bladed bastard sword as it ran the young Geknosian warrior through. Garavan looked down at the blade, buried to the crossguard just below his ribcage, then at the madly grinning human who still held onto it, a long, bleeding cut across their face from where they'd headbutted the flax as they attacked. Garavan felt his vision darken as the human softly sighed. "Good fight, Geknosian." Even now as he was skewered on the human's blade, he couldn't agree more, his rage quenched with his own lifeblood. He knew he'd been beaten, fair and square. "Good fight, human." Garavan fell to his knees as the human ripped the sword free, one final cut sending Garavan's head rolling across the sandy arena floor. Drake lowered the blade, arms aching as he hadn't realised how much he'd relived that fight. The Mousian journalist smiled at him before simply saying, "You enjoyed that fight, didn't you? There was a grin on your face the entire time you were telling the story." Drake chuckled, setting his sword down gently, lovingly. "Yes, ma'am. I learned then that I simply love a good fight. Nothing more or since has ever brought me that much joy. To walk the knife's edge without falling off is simply..." Drake relit his cigarette and took a long, happy drag. "Sublime." The Mousian journalist smiled knowingly and began packing her things up, saying, "I hope you'll have time for me tomorrow. I'd love to hear more about your battles. The galaxy has a lot of questions for its mythical figures." Drake agreed with a hearty laugh. Sliding his sword back into its scabbard, he stated, "As long as you listen, I'll talk." The Mousian smiled thankfully and extended her hand. "Thank you, Mr. Drake. It's been a pleasure." "You're always welcome, miss." The Mousian chuckled at her own faux pas as the human shook her hand. "The name's Sheen, spelt with an E-I-N instead of an I-N-E." "Nice to meet you, Miss Sheen. I hope we can talk again soon." Giving Drake a meek smile and walking to the door, Jean made a mental note to visit Drake again soon. However, while she was on Lido Offad, she might as well check in with that cranky old cyborg that changed her life.